Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we are going to be diving into episodes 650 through 652, which will cover manga chapters 720 through 722. And this is where I feel like, for me, Dressrosa really starts to hit its stride now that the pieces have been put in place and all the major players have been introduced, and we can finally kind of move forward with the meat and potatoes of the story. So yeah, synopsis. With the C block over and prepping for the D block, Luffy befriends another gladiator in Rebecca as we are told about her relationship with the toy soldier and why she's competing in the tournament, and we learn even more about the dark side of Dressrosa and the tournament, while everyone else reconvenes to prepare to take back Dressrosa from Doflamingo and the Don Quixote family. So, differences. Luckily, there aren't as many differences. It's just really drawn out and the pacing is still bad. But only two real significant differences that I wanted to mention. So first is during the Rebecca and Toy Soldier flashback. Most of it was adapted fairly faithfully, but there were a lot of moments that were just kind of extended out and sort of scenes were just kind of added to kind of add more context to the situation. For example, his training sequence with Rebecca, or where they censored a few other scenes as well, to reduce the violence, with the two human traffickers and kidnappers. They were beaten with a rifle rather than in the manga, the toy soldier actually shoots them. There's also a couple more filler scenes of Law fighting Doflamingo in episode 652 as we see how Law gets downed by Doflamingo. But in the manga, we don't actually see this scene till after he's already been pinned down by Fujitora, and so the actual canon part doesn't resume until the next episode. But those are the only two real major changes that I found. The rest were just small added scenes that kept getting longer and longer, or you'd see reaction shots from people. Alright, so yeah, with that, let's get into the episodes themselves. So we start off with quite the twist reveal, and where we start getting into why Bartolomeo is easily becomes one of my favorite new characters in the series. We see him walking by two guys mocking Luffy and his failure to save his brother Ace, and this whole time you thought that Bartolomeo was this insanely asshole character that was also trying to target and kill Luffy. But it was quite the opposite. Bartolomeo actually looks up to and admires Luffy, even so far as to refer to him as Luffy-senpai. Senpai is an honorific term in Japanese that you use when talking to a predecessor or a senior to you. And you hear this quite often in school animes and dramas where the underclass students refer to their upperclassmates as senpais. And you'll hear this sometimes in the workplace settings as well, when a junior employee will refer to their veteran employees as a senpai. Like I said, this was quite the twist for me at the time when Bartolomeo begins to defend Luffy by smushing the guy who badmouthed Luffy up against his barrier and a wall, nearly crushing him, declaring that Luffy will eventually become the Pirate King, which is incredible because this is kind of one of the rare occasions where someone else declares that Luffy will become the Pirate King. Obviously we have people like Kobe and even Dadan. She doesn't outright say it, but she's definitely thinking that. But yeah, this is one of those rare occasions where someone outside of the Straw Hats will declare that in regards to Luffy. And I find it incredible that we get this random character that we've only seen for a few episodes now declaring that. And it turns out he was present that day in Logtown 2 years ago when Luffy was captured by Buggy on the execution platform, but saved by the lightning among the crowd, and moved by the supposed miracle he just witnessed, that he forever became a fan of Luffy and the Straw Hats following their adventures throughout this entire time, clipping out newspapers, collecting their bounty posters. I mean, this guy is so cool. The crazy thing is, with hindsight, there are reports that they've already cast Bartolomeo in season 2 of the live-action Netflix series for him to be present for this moment, and something that the anime and manga was never able to do since obviously Bartolomeo had not existed yet. And I personally love this retcon. He's definitely kind of an unhinged asshole, but he's our unhinged asshole, and it's so awesome. And as we see in the rest of this arc, Bartolomeo is essentially a stand-in for us, the fans. He's literally an intense fanboy, the same way as many of us are. And I laugh so hard each time Bartolomeo geeks out on Luffy and the Straw Hats. He acts exactly like how I and probably many of us would act if we ever came face to face with Luffy or any member of the Straw Hats. Or in real life, if we ever met Eiichiro Oda and had, had the opportunity to be in his presence. So yeah, I love, and we'll keep going over all the moments of Bartolomeo just like geeking out over the Straw Hats because it's literally how all of us would react. And it's pretty funny to just kind of see a stand-in for us in the world of One Piece. But on the other hand, Cavendish is angry at all the attention Luffy keeps getting is now chasing him, while Bartolomeo is also trying to chase him and meet his idol for a different reason. And Luffy, while Chinjao also is now chasing Luffy to try and thank him for restoring his drill head, but Luffy still thinks all three of them are trying to attack him, which is pretty funny. And he's helped out by Rebecca, who shows him a way to get some rest. But on the way, another incredibly interesting interaction occurs as they run past a Burgess who's in the middle of a Dendemushi call with Blackbeard himself. The conversation itself doesn't contain much, as Blackbeard just kind of goads Luffy on, saying that he's taken Ace's fruit for himself, and it'll be like Ace is on his crew, which angers Luffy, and makes sure to let him know that no matter what, at the very least, he won't let Burgess win. However, the most intriguing part about this whole interaction is the blink and you'll miss it line just before this conversation, where we overhear Burgess say to Teach that, quote, he can't bring himself to trust Aokiji. Now, what could this possibly be referring to? Like, has Kuzan formed an alliance with Blackbeard, or are they working on a deal or something? Like, could it be that Kuzan has joined the Blackbeard pirates? At the time, I had the hardest time believing that Kuzan, a man who had such moral integrity, would ever lower himself to join forces with Blackbeard. But clearly there is something there, as at the end of Punk Hazard, if you recall, when he and Smoker were talking, even Smoker kind of questions Kuzan's intentions, and remembering that scene really kind of gets your mind spinning. But as a big of a Kuzan fan as I am, at the time, I still refused to believe that he'd ally himself with someone like Blackbeard. So we would all just kind of have to wait and see what is going on with Kuzan and Blackbeard. But it is something to be very, kind of keep your eye on, because it is very interesting to see these two kind of almost polar opposite type of characters interacting with each other. And it seems like, the crew doesn't quite trust Blackbeard's decision about dealing with Kuzan in whatever capacity. And you don't actually learn the details. And this is something I completely kind of forgot, because it just kind of slowly progresses throughout the series. But you don't actually learn what the result of this is until much, much later. For some reason, I had it in my head that this was revealed a lot sooner, but it actually doesn't. It almost, we don't get confirmation of what's actually going on here until more closer to where we are currently in the anime, which is kind of around the episode mark of like around 1120 or so. Later, we see Rebecca buying Luffy a meal, and if there is one way to get into Luffy's good graces, it's to feed him, as he will fight to the death for you, even if it means that he will beat up his own crew like Zoro, as he did with the Baroque Works bounty hunters on Whiskey Peak. Not only that, Rebecca seems to use the last of her money to buy Luffy this meal, and showing us a memory of her and her mom being hungry, resulting in her mom dying. This leads Rebecca to never say that she's hungry, and as Luffy points out, it's very similar to Momonosuke's samurai pride. But that makes two kids now who live in a world where they're afraid to admit that they're hungry due to PTSD related to their hunger at a younger age. This idea of children going hungry, combined with Luffy's love of food and feasts, becoming kind of a recurring theme in several arcs now and beyond, and I believe is integral to One Piece as a whole, and perhaps ties into potentially the ending of the series. But that is way too much to cover here, and we don't have all the pieces at this point in the story, so I'll save that discussion for a much later date. But kind of just keep that in the back of your mind, because I started to notice this particularly at this point, because it's like two characters now in basically two arcs in a row where this particular theme keeps coming up. Now, skipping ahead a little, in the following episode 651, we get to see more of this flashback, but still not the entire story. But we meet Rebecca's mother, Scarlet, who's voiced by yet another Detective Conan alum, Wakana Yamazaki, who voices Ran, and the central love interest and other main character in the series. But Wakana also voices Nojiko and temporarily voiced Nami during Akemi Okumura's sort of maternity leave during the Little Garden arc. Scarlet and Rebecca live outside the city in the flower gardens, but the way one of the royal guards calls her Lord Scarlet and Scarlet-sama in Japanese gives us a clue that she is probably part of the royal family. However, it's the current king, King Riku, that the citizens are being attacked by. So it's very unclear the political landscape of the Dressrosa kingdom, and what goes through your head is perhaps the reason Rebecca and Scarlet are living outside the city is due to the fact that she now knows King Riku is not a good person and decided to live away from him. But there's definitely more to this, as we do see Diamante chasing them as well. So yeah, this will get revealed and kind of fleshed out a lot more in another flashback that we'll see from a different character's perspective. But yeah, I definitely remember thinking how all these different sort of perspectives in Dressrosa really kept me interested, because I kept theorizing about all these different mysteries within the Dressrosa arc. And I think that's one of the things about Dressrosa that makes it really fun to watch, is the mysteries. And I'll talk more about this as we kind of bring them up throughout this arc. But later on, it becomes clear that from what the toy soldier tells Rebecca, that Scarlet was in fact part of the royal family, and therefore Rebecca is a princess, and that the royal family was somehow ousted and had the citizens of Dressrosa turn on them and had them hunted down so Doflamingo could come in and claim the throne and seize control of the Dressrosa kingdom. Now, I'm sure by now this is all starting to sound very familiar. A princess fighting back to take her country from a Shichibukai who has suddenly arrived and overtook it, and a gang of underground rebels building an army to take it back. It's essentially an even more ambitious version of Arabasta. Just like we've seen Oda mirroring things from the pre-time skip era in the previous arcs, Oda is doing it again, but this time with one of his best arcs from the pre-time skip era. And we will dive a bit more into this parallel as we keep going through the arc and more information gets revealed. But this is pretty incredible that Dressrosa is essentially a beefed up version of Arabasta. Now, this flashback is heartbreaking though, as Scarlet goes into town to get food for Rebecca despite the danger that it posed, and it kills her before she can get back to Rebecca. But the toy soldier recovers her body and the food, bringing it to Rebecca. But this is where her trauma from hunger begins, as she equates her being hungry as the reason for her mother's death. And it's just insanely cruel that she wasn't even allowed to grieve properly, as they're still being hunted for some reason. And seeing the toy soldier apologize over and over as he covers her and silences her cries to not be discovered, it's just a gut-wrenching scene. It's at this point, though, based on how the toy soldier talks and acts, and especially the anime gives a very obvious clue by lingering the camera on the empty chair at the dinner table, while the manga doesn't make it as obvious, but combined with the knowledge that anyone that gets turned into a toy by sugar gets forgotten. And I'll preface this by saying this is definitely kind of a spoiler, but I think for me at this point in the story, I had already come to this conclusion by this point, so I'm just going to talk about it. You come to the theory that the toy soldier is actually Rebecca's father and Scarlet's husband. It becomes very clear why he's so against Rebecca fighting in the Colosseum and cares so much for her. One other thing to note is that Scarlet also died with a smile, similar to how people with the Will of D died, but we don't really know if she's a D. But like I've theorized in the past, I personally don't think having the Will of D is restricted to people who actually carry the D initial. I firmly believe that anyone who is willing to risk their lives and fight for the freedom of others without regret can carry the Will of D, and that anyone could potentially carry on the Will of D, regardless of people who possess the middle initial or not. We get to see Rebecca and the toy soldier live their lives as she grows up. It's quite frankly a very cute moment, and there's a bit of a Japanese joke that's definitely lost in translation when the big kid throws that ball at Rebecca and then gets smacked by the toy soldier. And when the boy gets smacked, you can see on the back of his shirt it says "mo shimasen" in English or Romaji, which in Japanese is "I won't do it anymore," as if the shirt is speaking on behalf of the kid, expressing remorse. And you can similarly see the same thing written on the kid's hoodie, trying to give Rebecca the love letter when the toy soldier smacks him over the head with his rifle. It's kind of funny. However, despite this happy and cute time, the ugly side of the One Piece world rears its head as two human traffickers show up to prey on an orphan child to capture and sell her into slavery, necessitating the toy soldier to train Rebecca how to defend herself, leading us back to the present. One fact that has been pointed out to me about Rebecca and the toy soldier's relationship is that it bears a striking similarity to the story of the Nutcracker and the Mouse King, which according to Wikipedia is a fairy tale written in 1816 by Prussian author E.T.A. Hoffmann, in which a young girl's favorite Christmas toy, the Nutcracker, comes alive and after defeating the evil Mouse King in battle, whisks her away to a magical kingdom populated by dolls. And yeah, this does sound very similar. And it's never been confirmed whether Oda actually referenced this in sort of an SBS in a question or anything like that. But yeah, you can kind of tell. It probably is. In the present, Luffy gets caught in a trap by Rebecca to take him out before the fight to reduce her obstacles with the help of the prisoners in the cells behind them. Of course, Luffy breaks free pretty easily and quickly. However, instead of getting angry or weary, Luffy actually just calmly lets her go because to Luffy, anyone that feeds him can't really be all that bad. But of course, Luffy is just incredible at reading people, and he can immediately tell that Rebecca really had no desire to actually hurt him. And honestly, this one was pretty obvious. It doesn't take observation haki to tell that this wasn't something Rebecca wanted to do, as it was all over her face and body language. One little callback I love about this scene is that Luffy continues to eat the food that was spilled on the ground, and while during the scuffle with Rebecca, similar to how Zoro still ate Rika's onigiri off the ground because this was food that someone gave to him. However, an awful reality of the Corrida Coliseum games comes to light as we and Luffy learn that they are all prisoners meant to fight for the entertainment of Doflamingo and the citizens of Dressrosa, referencing how many gladiators in Rome were also slaves forced to fight. The picture that was painted earlier of people that joined of their own volition is ripped away, and this is where one of the central themes of Dressrosa really start to take shape, that nothing is what it actually seems, and things that are positive looking on the outside hide an ugly truth underneath, which pervades almost all aspects of Dressrosa. Whether it's the happy toys actually being people who have been cursed, Violet being forced into working for the Don Quixote family, and now learning that several of the combatants in the Colosseum are actually prisoners forced to fight to the death, or even Fujitora being presented initially as a gullible blind hermit addicted to gambling, but it turns out he's an incredibly sharp and ungodly strong marine admiral. There are also some visual examples of this, like the beautiful sunflower garden hiding a base for the resistance against Doflamingo, Jola's art being used as a tool to control and harm people, Sugar, the cute and small little girl, literally being in possession of one of the most terrifying devil fruits in the series thus far. There are also positive examples of this theme as well, like the Tontara, despite their small and cute appearance, are actually stupid strong and lightning fast. Bartolomeo turning out to not be hunting Luffy, but actually a super fan, and so many other examples that have yet to be shown. But this theme is ever present in this entire arc and is one of the main central themes of the story of Dressrosa. There's also another very prominent theme in this arc that is hinted at here in this scene, but hasn't really begun to take shape quite yet, and that is the theme of family and what it is to be a family, as we saw Rebecca's mini flashback with her mom dying sometime when she was a small child, and the toy soldier took her in and basically raised her, becoming her surrogate father. This idea of what it actually means to be a family and who our family is, which is not just a Dressrosa specific theme, but a theme that's present in the entire series, as the Straw Hats and many pirate crews are basically found families. Also, the fact that Doflamingo calls his pirate crew the Don Quixote family is another aspect of this theme coming into play as well. And definitely keep these two themes in the back of your mind as we progress through the arc, because Oda really hammers these points in very obvious and subtle ways throughout the entire arc. With that, the D block round of the Corrida Coliseum is about to begin, with Rebecca vowing to win so that she and the toy soldier can live happily together. But upon setting foot onto the battlefield, she is met with vitriolic boos, as everyone recognizes that she is the granddaughter of the disgraced King Riku, which confuses and angers Luffy because he knows how kind and good of a person Rebecca is, and seeing Luffy get angry for someone is always a moment that gets you hyped, because now you know that Luffy is going to fight tooth and nail to help her. And not only that, but Oda deliberately mirrored Luffy's expression with Chinjao and his hatred of Garp, adding to the theme of family and calling back to sort of the theme of children paying for the sins of their fathers, or in this case, grandfathers, which was a very large theme that took place during the Marineford arc with Ace and Roger. And that's one thing that seems to be a big issue with the people in the One Piece world and how the world government views. It's like many of the descendants have to pay for the mistakes and sins of their ancestors. And this is definitely a form of projection, because when you think about it, the world government, and particularly the Celestial Dragons, often conflate their sort of power and status with their bloodlines, because their bloodlines are so pure and sacred as being one of the 20 founding, kingdoms and kings that started the world government. And the Celestial Dragons, they get their sort of status and power from that bloodline. And so if they see themselves as getting all of the goodness from their ancestors and the bloodlines, that the similar thing must happen for the opposite side of that coin, which is if your ancestors were criminals or pirates or outlaws, that you as their offspring and descendants are also that as well. And so, yeah, you can kind of really see that the way the world government sees things like that, and that pervades into just sort of the overall society and the way the people, regular people, kind of think. And that's why pirates and the Will of D are so terrifying to the world government, because it kind of challenges that idea that you make your own destiny, that you can actually be whoever you want to be despite your ancestors. It's sort of a kind of the familial version of freedom, whether you're bound by your ancestors and bloodline, or whether you can break free of all of that and be who you want to be despite your bloodline. Going back to Rebecca, though, this is where I thought there might have been a small chance that even if Luffy won, that he'd give the Mera Mera no Mi to Rebecca. But I also had a difficult time coming to terms with that theory, because the whole reason Rebecca wants and needs that power is to defeat the Flamingo, and we all know that Luffy is going to be the one to defeat him, so why would she even need the fruit then? Like, narratively, it didn't quite line up, but I personally still had no idea what the fate of the Mera Mera fruit was going to be, despite all these different ideas popping up while I was reading, which is another reason why this arc, again, like I said, is so fun to read the first time, because there were so many mysteries that kept you very intrigued and engaged throughout the whole thing. Like, I was just like coming up with different ideas and theories of where the story was going, and the community was also very much on top of it as well, at least with the manga. The anime really kind of killed a lot of like kind of hype and sort of anticipation because of how difficult it was to watch. But that's a whole nother subject that I don't really want to touch, because I've already talked it to death. But anyways, Rebecca is heckled by the crowd, and it even experiences some sexism from the other gladiators. But an unlikely turn of events happen as Cavendish, of all people, coming in. And it turns out, despite his animosity towards Luffy, he's actually a pretty decent, good guy, as he comes out defending Rebecca and scolds everyone for being hypocrites, and talks about how brave it is for anyone to stand in the ring and risk their lives. And despite how ridiculous Cavendish is, this one scene really turned around my perception of him to someone that I'm starting to kind of like. Another example of things aren't as they initially seem, but I agree with the one guy commenting, why the horse and the porn? Like, he expected a situation like this to happen, and he comes riding in on his horse, and then he just kind of lets the horse go after the round is about to start. The rest of this episode is left to set up the impending battle, with the toy soldier regrouping everyone and getting them prepared for the battle, while Zoro, with the help of Wicca again, rushes towards the Sunny to help out Nami and the others against Jola. But along the way, they have a sort of a regroup of their own, as Sanji, Kinemon, and Violet all converge together as well. And Zoro is pretty funny in this scene, as Wicca has to basically treat Zoro like he's 5 and tell him the difference between left and right, which he's seriously offended by. But the part that gets me is that even though he's been stated that Sanji's cover name is Sunland, Zoro still refuses to call him by his actual name and calls him Curly Brow Land, which I was like, that's another level of just being spiteful. The final scenes of this set of episodes is a pretty non-canon scene. There's a very similar one later that is canon, but it essentially to highlight how Rebecca fights using the will of her mother to never harm anyone, but also combined with the strength of her father, the toy soldier, who has taught Rebecca how to fight defensively and use her opponent's strength and momentum against them, similar to like real life martial arts styles like Aikido, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Hapkido, and Judo. So yeah, the setup has finally been completed and things are really starting to kick into gear, but the next set of episodes is where things really start to heat up as some shocking developments start to happen with Doflamingo beginning to take a more active role in the story. So can't wait to start getting into that. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates when I post new episodes, and to see some pictures of my manga collection and card collection. And yeah, like I've always said, just listening to the podcast is enough for me, but if you feel like extra supporting me, please feel free to check out my Buy Me a Coffee profile. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!